by that, my name is Joel Onyango, and I am a researcher at African Center for Technology Studies. My focus as part of this, the team that is delivering this series of webinar as part of Africa Research and Impact Network. So should you have any questions, please feel free to also put them in the chat as we continue. But as I indicated, this is a more participatory sort of discussion. And as it is, we are welcoming all kinds of contributions from different perspectives. So if you've not introduced yourself to the group, please go ahead and just put in your name and your affiliation in the chat area. So as part of this decolonizing method series, I mean, we are thinking of decoloniality as part of freeing thinking. You know, if you free thinking, then you're giving people an opportunity to express themselves and be able to engage in that expression towards finding out ways of innovating beyond what we could call the regular way of doing things, the dominant way of doing things. This could include aspects of, for example, scholarly activism that gives room for different participants or different players in research to actually contribute in different contexts. You can have words like research resistance, you can have words as, research justice, you can have terms including indigenous storytelling or sort of story work, which really embeds into what we do in different settings for decolonizing how things work out. In this work, we're actually looking at different bits and pieces that together, based on our first event, we'll be able to define collectively what we mean by decolonizing methods. And this includes the ability to challenge power through methods, whether we value the diversity in how we apply and use methods, some philosophical underpinnings in associated methods, how we are able to use methods in terms of having articulated them appropriately for our own work, and also considering the different dimensions that are associated with research methods to sustainability. So in all this, our focus today is actually just one of them, which is in focusing on valuing diversity. And some of the work that we are embedding this is basically trying to explore how different methods have been applied, different settings at such, ideally in a way that demonstrates diversity, but also opens up room for multiple framings, multiple output, multiple voices. And it's regard that we are thinking, well, today, just to go out of the traditional way of doing it, we are going to invite everybody to contribute their own perspectives of what methods are and how diversity works in that space. So we're asking how methods have been used to actually open up and broaden out and the aspect of letting go into innovative systems and framing. The STEPS Centre in its work has been proponents of this multiple pathways approach. And in this story, there's always been the conversation between two planes. When you think about the inputs that we have in research, you can start thinking of them, the things that we attend to when you're thinking about research or understanding the different problems that we have or the different solutions that we're exploring in research. And often it has a plane of between, when you're narrowing in or when you're broadening out. And the other plane of this is about whether we have some perspective on the output side, looking at recognizing specific ideas and sticking by them, or opening up possibilities and having different sort of plural conditions that can be taken up as outputs of the work we do. And this speaks to whether you're closing down or you're opening up. So in the broader scheme of things, what you're saying here is that by thinking of decolonizing and valuing diversity, you're basically saying if you focus on opening up and you focus on broadening out, then every problem perhaps or every solution might have multiple ways on which people look at it. Here I have, for example, a graphics of, you could say this person is thinking about 8, or maybe it's the infinity symbol, or maybe it's, it's a wave, or depending on where you're sitting, how you're looking at it, you might have different views. So when you basically put this together, and you're saying it's important even in research that we open up and and broaden out when it comes to the methods we use. Still following in this space, you realize that even in outputs or inputs, there could be some level of involvement, whether it's more participatory or it's more expert related. And still, we can have various different methods that we can think about in this space, from cost-benefit analysis all the way to things that facilitate an open space like methods and multi-criteria mapping. And really think about these different options. In the end, you have to start thinking of how does what I do contribute to this space? Am I necessitating the potential for opening up and broadening out? Am I accepting plurality in the work that I do in terms of the sources I get my inputs in and the kind of outputs that I get from these different methods? So when you start thinking about diversity of methods, of course, in some way, you want to think about how diversity of methods actually contributes to us doing something that is unique and looking into the future. And by this, you start thinking about, we come from we move from some of controlling, individualistic, kind of categorized ways of doing research, and try to transform this by encompassing different imaginations, different thoughts of view, so that in the end, we have some kind of mutualistic but a collective way in which we look at the methods that we apply. Stemming from these ideas is where we start thinking about valuing diversity, bringing in everybody's view onto the table and communicating that view as a strength rather than as a potential of scattering the way we think. Now, in that perspective, today's discussion actually centers on you as a participant, as a researcher, as a stakeholder. What does it mean for you when you think about diversity of methods? And as I indicated, the session today is more about everybody contributing an idea, what they think about this, and also thinking about the methods they have used before. Have they been able to broaden out in terms of the input they use for their methods, or have they been able to open up when it comes to research spaces that they are giving the outputs towards? And in some sense, in our discussion, we are also very interested in specific examples that can be resourceful in demystifying this. So I don't know if there are any specific questions up to now, because this conversation today, we want to try to make it as open and as contributory as possible across the different participants. I don't know if there are any initial thoughts. Why would we even care about diversity of methods when it comes to sustainability research in any way? Is it even important? Any initial takers? All right, so to try and make it slightly easier, we have designed some questions and put this as part of Mentimeter for those who know about this. And I'll just paste a link in Mentimeter for everybody to just think about what does valuing diversity of research methods mean to you or to your work? How does it really, add value into that space? So I'll just paste that in the chat area, and we can see the kind of responses in terms of, why should we pay attention, or rather, should we even pay attention at all when it comes to valuing diversity of research methods or how they are practiced? But essentially, if there are any questions, please go ahead. Yes, Adriana, we can go ahead and jump into the conversation already. Thanks for Sontag. You've said the diversity of method is very important as it provides more possibilities in terms of solutions or improvement. Any other thoughts? Do you want to explain further, Sontag? if you're there, if you want to explore further what this means.
Hello, Joel.
Yes.
Can we speak via the microphone?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
This is Quixie Sonntag. I just think that if we only use traditional methods for learning more about people's situations in order to improve challenges or address challenges, it's very limiting. And traditional science is typically the silo approach to problems. And I think with the diversity of methods, we are approaching more of a systems kind of analysis of issues. Must be one way of solving one problem. There must be more than one way, and in complex problems or complex situations, the more different approaches one can find, the more likely you would be to be able to make a difference. And I think the biggest shortcoming is possibly the way that problems are solved top down instead of bottom up.
I think, Chrissy, the idea you're bringing up about, when you think about opening up that space, then you're actually including more solutions, but also including more people, and whether the solutions are driven from top down or bottom up. Adriana, do you want to already also continue the conversation here?
Yes, thanks.
And Charles
Joel.
also says that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Joel. I will switch off my camera. Okay. Well, here I am. I would like to share some of the experience that I have been working in my PhD with the indigenous people in Bolivia. What I'm trying to work with them, it is really try to decolonize all these research methods that now in literature are quite abundant, no? But it is I'm taking more this approach that Wilson proposed, that we don't talk about methods, that we should talk more about strategies. And these strategies are more like, okay, trying to go in the way with the people we are working with. Because when you set up a research method, it is more in this framework of the of the Western science, that you as a researcher start thinking about how you approach the others, and how at the end you are imposing your methods. And the idea on decolonizing the methods, it is working exactly different strategies together with the people, how we can deal with the problems we are finding in the process. And this is what we were trying to do during the last 4 years with my colleagues in Bolivia. We use the third mission of the university, that it is more related in the way that how we relate with the communities, the interaction, the social interaction, it's called there in Latin America. And this social interaction, the university will go to the communities to try to see how, what are the needs and how we can collaborate to each other. And then the university, it is a partner of the communities, and together with the communities they start trying to see what are the different paths that could be important. It could be from a political perspective, but also could be what, for instance, what in the framework that we are working in the project, it is more related to territorial planning. So what they would like to do with this territorial planning, it also could be what we can do together with agroecological systems that the partners are also working, and the indigenous are very interested to deal with this. So this try to use the different ways of thinking and the different ways of the people really would like to enter in the discussion and enter in the dialogue, and try to see from this praxis relate to each other and build new theories and build a new knowledge. So I think that this will be more interesting than imposing a research methods from the researcher perspective. I will leave it like this.
Thanks for that, Adriana. I mean, it speaks to the whole idea of thinking of it as participatory in some sense, but also thinking of it as something that allows for more input from more people. So basically speaks to our, broadening out in some sense. God, you have your hand up. Do you want to add your voice to this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Mine just to add my voice to what Adriana is saying on opening up and broadening out some of the approaches. Just share an experience. Currently, we're involved in a research on transforming universities for a changing climate. And it's a research that has just overall framework, but then it uses a participatory PAR, participatory action research, where groups are formed, diverse groups, groups with diversity are formed in different universities in 5 different countries. And in the group, they go through ideation stage where they actually identify the most pressing problem within their community. Universities involved and also the community involved. And in my experience through that, it's an ongoing project, is that it gives room for diverse ideas, views on how to tackle issues, and also it provides the researcher with an opportunity to actually know or identify a really pressing need in the community. So the whole aspect of opening up and broadening out, for me, I think it's one of the best approach, because it does not limit us to actually the normal scientific methods that we have, but provides also the opportunity for us to actually broaden our thinking and provide solutions that actually go in line with provide real solutions, if I can say. So that's what I would say, Joel.
Thanks, Godwin. I think the conversation still goes towards sort of local solutions for local problems, if I'd say. That's really interesting of looking at it and appreciating that difference. Charles, you have a comment here, and you're saying that when you think about diversity, you're thinking about democracy as well. Would you want to comment further on this?
Yes, Joel, have you called on me to expound?
Yes, on your comments about democracy and diversity of methods.
Oh, yeah, I think when you pose the question, let me put, when you pose the question, I thought in that increasing or availing, especially the various research methods, especially in the public space, is kind of enhancing, especially democratization of methods. It's actually one of the discussions which is ongoing today. There's the Kenya Think Tank Forum going on, and they were really focusing on methods and especially towards post-COVID recovery. Because if we are limited in terms of, if you find maybe early career researchers cannot really utilize our methods or cannot access, maybe because of cost or because of institutional affiliation, then it's kind of like being dictatorial in the research method. So I was thinking that increasing, availing them in the public space for access, especially by early career researchers, is kind of enhancing the democratized, the utilization. Of course, there should be acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. And to already start tying it out to actual aspects that are associated with the current ongoings. Frida, you mentioned that this whole aspect of diversity of methods allows for multiple ways of analyzing data, and that comment about accepting things from different sectors, covering different perspectives. Do you also want to add your voice to this? As I said, this is a conversation that is relatively open, and we want to have as many people contributing their ideas as possible. Do you want to, Frida Mashandi, do you want to say something about this?
Okay, yes, I think I would, though not so much. But what I think is that, even just not wanting to be one-sided, like in terms of research, you would want to look at all the sectors, because I know one would have different objectives, but those objectives would cater so many sectors at hand. So if you have a diversity in terms of research methods, it means you may be able to analyze from different angles, and that may actually bring out positive results at the end of the day, not only to be maybe one-sided because of the diversion of issues in an economy or in a sector or maybe in an area of research. So I think that would be my comment, just to back up on what I had already earlier said.
Yeah, Frida, I think that is also a way of bringing different things together. Joanes Atela, you are sort of bringing a different nexus to this and thinking about the boundaries that define diversity. Do you want to add your voice into this as well?
Yeah, I think the debate around diversity is actually building on some of the traditional methods that have been applied in research, like exploratory research, where we try to engage different people and try to take into account the diversity of methods, opinions, and of course interests. But certainly that traditionally has had some hurdles in terms of to what extent can you be, sort of include the diversity, and then to where do you sort of define the boundaries when it comes to now including the different sort of voices or methods in this particular case. And the other question relates to who is supposed to do that. And of course that ties to Marina's next comment, which is about not just about finding solutions. I mean, in the current situation where we face global challenges, I think solutions are very important to be found. So if diversity can bring those solutions in a much more effective way, I think that would be that would be really be very critical. And speaking in the era where we are talking about research for impact. And if you tie all this together, the big question is, to what extent should we sort of, if we talk about this as a research community, to what extent should we sort of define diversity? What are those boundaries? And, you know, are there certain experiences or, best practices where we can see that there is, a well-defined scope of diversity included or in a particular research trajectory, and that, resulted into some, good outcomes in the process? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Joanes, for that perspective. I think the question about boundaries and who does what also brings the whole idea of, as researchers, as scholars, as policy players, do we reflect in how we handle things? And the conversation about appreciating that diversity and how it actually, it's instrument, how that appreciating the diversity is instrumental in us actually being able to find solutions or even identify the complexity of problems. Marina, do you want to, sort of explore a bit on your, argument that it's not just about the diversity of solutions, but it goes beyond to actually thinking about problems. And I want to, as you respond also, does boundary of that inclusion play any part?
Thanks, Joe. Yes, I think just to pick up on Joanes's point, I think the critical question there is who defines it, no? Because often the sort of classic process we go through in research design, because we're talking about research methods, is around, often it's very disciplinary focused, no? So you think about your question, and you think about what the right tools are to answer the question, and you can mix methods, and you can bring different things and look at different angles, right? But all of that is still framed within a research perspective of producing a certain type of knowledge, yeah? Obviously more participatory traditions. I work a lot with participatory action research, where you think of yourself as the co-researcher. I think that the question of where the boundaries lie is fluid, and so that's a negotiated space, yeah? And I guess the point that I was making is that yes, there's, as was said at the beginning of the conversation, that if we're dealing with complex problems, we know that to navigate complexity, we need diversity. There isn't only one view of the system of the problem, and obviously perspectives from, if you like, I often talk about within the system, so kind of the embodied experience of that problem, often particularly if we're focused with marginalized communities, that's central to understanding it, understanding the system from within. But it goes, I think, a step further, which is why we're also, this is a conversation within a series of events around decolonizing methodologies, because we are implicated in the structures that actually continue to, in many ways, colonize, that continue in many ways to value certain knowledges over others. So embracing and valuing diversity means that you might actually be taking seriously what it means to really shift that dynamic, to shift some of those power dynamics. And so then if we go back to the question of the boundaries, I think then it is even more so a negotiated space, right? Because if you like, what you're seeking is not just the best next publication in the best possible journal, but actually it's about shifting, it's about creating change in the world. And so you might put different boundaries on the diversity, yeah, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Marina. It's almost like it's going back to a specific level of customization. I mean, if you want a particular solution in a particular setting, then you have to explore that solution or that complex problem in a particular way in which you are able to express yourself in this. And I think looking at, for example, some of the responses that we've gotten from the Mentimeter, the idea of complex problems cannot be responded to without diversity of how we approach them. The idea that you need different methods to actually answer different questions. Is it possible that in certain instances, the same questions requires answering with the same type of methods or different types of methods? One question, different methods in how we exploit. And when we do open up that space for different types of methods in answering a specific or rather same question, are we likely to end up with, of course, diversity of outputs in the end? I mean, that's, sort of thinking about it in that context. But still, this is also a point of thinking about justice in some sense. Creating that space gives us, sort of just solutions, ideally. Of course, thinking of also the question about having different challenges that require different solutions and therefore requires multidisciplinarity, multi-stakeholder engagements, and that diversity also necessitating diversity of methods. And this is from Tom Randa. Do you want to expound your sort of your argument in this space, Tom?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joel. I think my comment resonates well with what the previous commenters have talked about and expanded. The diversity of methods being applicable in solving different kind of problems. I think the bit which I can maybe just expand on is on when you look at different kind of challenges the world faces now and maybe in the future, different methods, of course, will be required. And now when looking at the solutions to these multiple challenges the globe is facing, there are costs attached to them. So the cost benefit analysis comes in, and when you have different methods or diversity of methods, the best solution, which is cost effective and more effective, of course, can be settled on when we have the diversity of methods. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for those comments. I think what is emerging, of course, as the discussion continues, is in some sense having sort of an inward reflection as researchers, but also thinking about appreciating different values attached to different kinds of methods, and understanding the complexity associated with different questions that we as researchers follow, or as people who generate evidence for action actually follow. As we think about this, the other question we had was whether we need to start thinking about the different sort of methods that we have used in this space, which that we have used practically in some sense based on different people's experiences. Is there any method that you could say effectively as a sort of in your work as associated with broadening out and opening up in research? I don't know if there are any comments to that. There was already a comment about participatory action research, and I think Marina has also said that she uses part of this, and I think it's God, someone also said that they have an actual example where they use this. There's also the part of citizen participation, as it's iterated in sharing of results and throughout a project cycle. Are there any other methods we could consider to be in this space, and have we used them? What examples can we share regarding this one? any takers, any methods that you're applying that could be something to explore further, to discuss further, or a method that, as much as we want to promote it as something that allows us to open up and broaden out, it has its challenges?
Yes. Can I go? Joel?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I need to speak about the participatory action research, and being involved in it, I found, of course, it's an opening up research and broadens out, but I found some challenges with it, because because of the diversity of views and also angles through which people are looking at an issue. Usually, getting resolutions sometimes usually take time, and you can have observations, or you can have strategies, ideas that are being given that are actually conflicting, and sometimes resolving this would require really a long thought process and an engagement. It involves also issues of ensuring that you build team building, because you have the participatory action research groups, and with these different ideas, then how do you forge forward? How do you integrate them and forge forward to have a solution or achieve your purpose? So that's some of the challenges that I'm actually observing with this method.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. I'm wondering whether the example from Adriana, the circles of dialogue of wisdom. Adriana, do you want to briefly explain this to people who are not familiar with it, and whether they could be resourceful in answering Godwin's challenges associated with participatory research?
Yes, okay, thank you again. Well, what we try to do with this method, it was incorporating some of the principles of participatory action research, but going a little bit further in something that we call, well, it is a theory from Latin America, call it dialogue of wisdom, yeah, where all the different knowledge from the different knowledge systems could be embraced. And there we built our framework using the Quechua philosophy, yeah, the indigenous philosophy from the people from Bolivia, and incorporating those principles that reciprocity, plurality, relationality within the process. And then also what we try to do going further in these participatory action research approaches that are out is that most of them, they are focusing on the dialogue, but dialogue from the point of view of speaking, where it is more important of giving voice to the voiceless. In our approach, we're saying it is not enough to give him voice. It is more important to listen, because a lot of people is trying to speak up, but who is listening? And then as a researchers, we try to involve to use also this philosophy of the indigenous people that is focusing on the listening and feeling, and the feelings on the yeah, on all the things that are related to the connecting to each other. And we found that the listening give us this possibility to go further with those limitations that we found in different participatory action research methods that focus on speaking and giving the voice to others, and more in the listening. But also, the other thing that it is important in the process of listening, it is that we must listen to us, yeah, as a researcher, recognizing our on limitations, but also the power that we are sometimes exercising towards the others without noticing. Yeah, all the different frameworks that we have and has been also building up with our education system and the society. So how we can just step a little bit further and think and how we are dealing with these frames of mind within the research. I will leave it like this, and I can share our article that now is published, that you can go a little bit further in the reading. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. I think your case study really gives sense to what we are talking about when we think about this space around diversity. If you could share your publication with the participants and with us, it will be very, very resourceful in continuing these conversations. Evelyn points out the idea that challenges associated with resources, and the resources here she mentions that includes time, and basically how fast some of these solutions are needed by different players, especially in the public policy space. And Chrissy has mentioned that she's using participatory reflection and action. Would you want to say how you're able to jump the hoop when it comes to urgency, but also resources in your application of the participatory reflection and action?
Yes, thank you. I don't think that participatory reflection and action is something that happens quickly. In my limited experience, it is a process that relies on building up trust. And to build trust with somebody who is very different to yourself and with all the power elements involved takes time. And I find that generally research tends to be rushed, and there are deadlines and people want to publish and that sort of thing. And to really dig down into what people are experiencing, their lived experiences that help understand the issues that they are facing, is a time-consuming exercise. And I love what Adriana said about the listening part. Yes, it's absolutely essential that people have the voice to be able to say their side of, tell their side of things. But it's of no use if there's not an active listening process associated with that. So in the way that I've done it up to now, it has been in rural communities where there's also a language barrier. So English, although people speak English and they can understand English, it's not their first language. And I came from a veterinary perspective, from an animal health and welfare perspective, that includes zoonoses, in other words, diseases that animals can transmit to humans. So it's a complex issue. And it really took time to even just elevate that topic in that community through participatory reflection and action. But I utilized some of the participatory methods of poster making, walking through the community and listening to what is happening in the community and being shown things. I focused a lot on identifying assets and things that people may not realize they have already at their disposal that they can use. And this particular group of people initially was very shy and yeah, they didn't really want to speak out and say things. They felt intimidated. But as time went on and we built up that trust, that's when they started discovering their voice, and they realized that they had this agency and that they could say things. And as the process developed, and what is also specific to participatory reflection and action is that reversal of roles, where I didn't go in as being the expert. I went in as being the learner, and they were the experts teaching me about their lives and what was going on with them. And then together we explored certain avenues, and I was able to facilitate some new learning for them. And eventually it was the handing over of the stick at the end that I think sort of completed that process, where they were able to continue on their own and make a difference within their community. So, so it's really about getting people to feel comfortable to talk, and then being listened to, and then being enabled through the process to learn things, learn knowledge and skills, and then carry on by themselves. A project that I'm getting involved in now is involving professionals. So it's not a community, a sort of grassroots community like in the rural areas. And there I think the concept of community of practice could be a possible methodology, but I'm still seeking more ideas. So anything that anybody can suggest would be great. And up to now, I've already learned a lot from all the comments and the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chrissy. I'm seeing here a comment from Aaron that talks about risks and vulnerability assessment, and it actually mentions the idea of using community of practice. Aaron, do you also want to just give us the setting, or rather an example in how you have applied this kind of method and kind of outcomes that you have realized from it as part of opening up and broadening out?
Thanks, Joel, and I'm Haron and ARIN fellow. And regarding the RVR risk and vulnerability assessment, is a tool that we have been is a method that we have been able to use to assess the risk in the communities, to understand the perspective of community in terms of risk and in terms of other related like adaptation, their coping strategies relating to the risk that they experience within that within the village and within the community itself. And apart from that one, involving the stakeholders who are drawn from different sectors, and to try to validate and understand what we have been able to assess from the community. And this was basically to try to widen the perspective from both the community and also understanding the perspective from the higher level, that is the other stakeholders. But now the issue was there's a gap between the way community conceptualize risk and the way they understand risk, and also the way the other stakeholders and also the policy analysts understand it. So that's the gap that is still not well understood on how we may be able to fill a gap between where you need to understand the concept at the root cause, and the person who is being affected by an event or a hazard, and the person who is implementing, or the person who is in the high levels trying to develop policies that are being implemented to ensure that this community or the area, the people in the community are being less affected or less vulnerable to disaster. And also, I will also talk about the spatial methodology in terms of which we always use to understand the global change, and basically narrowing down to the aspect of a small administrative area, for example, Kenya. Now, the question is, which is the best method that we'll be able to use within a short time, and then we'll be able to give you the output, and we'll be able to reduce the error, because every methodology has its advantage and disadvantage. But the question is, how do we reduce the disadvantage and able to ensure that whatever we get is able to communicate to the wider, to the broader objective of what we anticipate to get as an output of what we intend to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. I would be curious to know if the whole idea around risk assessment can be explored and the approach you're talking about can be explored when you're thinking about non-risk related research. But I think that's a conversation that we can continue expounding on. Gonzalez says that you ended up having to use dialogues and community of practice as part of your space for decolonizing methods, but also opening up and broadening out. Do you want to expound further on your example that you used through your research?
Yes, thank you. Sure. I did my master thesis with the indigenous woman in Brazil. I'm from Brazil, and my grandmother was also indigenous on the Guarani group. But yeah, I had to do like the whole protocol, right? The research protocol and the proposal, everything beforehand. And then I think this is like a lot of the research how it's set up today. So we have it to first of all think how you do research and after talk with the community. So something that Adriana was talking in the beginning, that the way that we can decolonize ourselves and how we do research, it's like very important that we should go to the community first and ask them what they need. But yeah, it's quite difficult today. But then the way that I did was to them to go to the community and ask women what they actually need and what they think about the initial ideas. And then we were together doing my research. So I call them collaborators. And in that sense, that we redid my whole proposal, my whole research based on their needs and based what they believed. And then we did a lot of like dialogues, and also yeah, it's like through the research we talk and reformulate my research questions. And then I follow basically the participatory action research from Borda. It's a Colombian research, and then he called also his research as something that senti pensante. It's like we think and then we feel at the same time. And then this is something that we can bring it to the research, something that we can bring it into the way of thinking and how to think in a different way. So basically it's like to do dialogues and think, as have been mentioned before, like the way that our power can really influence the community and the collaborators from the research. We have to reflect a lot on this. Yeah, I'm reading the comments. Yeah, on these issues. And yeah, so I think it's like one tip is to really to think together with the community and then the community of practice that it can happen during the field work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gonzalez. I think there's another term that is coming into place here: improvise, and how flexible we are as researchers. When are we supposed to do everything in a specific sort of enclosure before we start talking to respondents, for example, in this kind of open up opening up methods, or do we then just have space for us to be a bit flexible and to improvise as we go? Marina, you've shared quite some examples in this space. I think also from the STEPS Centre sort of work, and giving different ideas around improvisation. You've also talked about an interesting method, just trying to find it in the chat, related to social movement learning. Would you want to also comment on that?
Sure, thanks, Joel. Yeah, no, super interesting discussion. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time in the world of action research. I'm part of the editorial team for the Action Research Journal, etc. And two things which have come up here, which I think are really relevant. So one is this question of trust that someone mentioned already, and a little anecdote from another project I'm involved in which we're using participatory action research with children and young people. And one of the researchers the other day was saying to me, we spend all this time thinking about how you build trust to kind of enter, right? And then to be able to bring different methods into an action research framework. And in this project, we're actually looking at children leading the research process. And this researcher said to me, and you know what? They don't need a whole process to build trust because they have it, right? Because they're already connected into their own community. And so this idea of kind of us as the kind of external researcher that has to do all these things in order for the methods to work, which is what brings me to the social movement learning idea. And this idea that actually, what if we flip the dynamic, and what if part of our role is to understand what's already there? Yeah. And so it really shifts the way one thinks about who they are in the process. Do we bring the methods and tools into it, or actually is it for us to discover the tools and methods that are already in use and can really help us understand the learning that exists? So that's kind of one point. And then the other around mess in the process. And yes, Joel, you talk about letting go, and you talk about kind of freeing ourselves and decolonizing methodologies. That's a really critical aspect. And so having in action research, if you have a methodological kind of approach, as Thais, was just describing Orlando Falsborda's approach, right? You have a sort of an overall approach, but then the specific methods and tools you bring in, you have to be quite agile, yeah, because you can't predefine exactly what the right question is. If you're really opening up, then the question needs to also be defined or redefined with the stakeholders you're working with. So, and I just put in the chat there a link to an issue that a group of students that are attached to the STEPS Centre, who are working with pastoralist communities, developed around the idea of methodological mess. And so the fact that, we think of methods as, and this is Andy Sterling often says this, as ordering devices, but what if we think of them as devices to help us build relationships and have conversations? And then it opens up a lot of space for a much more fluid approach to methods.
Great. I think the conversation is actually bringing in certain characteristics of methods that we should think about when we are thinking about using different methods. I wanted to bring Michael here because of that the background you have, I think, is in climate-related issues, if I'm not wrong. How has this worked out for you when you're thinking about plurality of options when it comes to methods for research?
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Michael Bull. I'm based at the African Climate and Development Initiative at the University of Cape Town, and ARIN fellow. Yeah, well, maybe mine. So I work at the intersection of national and international climate policy. But one of my reflections during my research and during this conversation then has been, this discussion of opening up methods or transdisciplinarity, inclusiveness in our research process. I find a lot of the time the discussion centers around work with communities. But at least from my perspective, less of it is about work with policymakers. So, yeah, in high-level policy processes. And they're particularly thinking about the role of knowledge in policy processes and how do we do things differently for greater impact in these processes? Because policymakers are working under extreme constraints, environments of, extreme rigidity, and sort of what knowledge has currency in those processes is quite narrow. And usually to have impact in those processes, you need to do quite a sort of have quite a narrow way of going at it that is directly relevant to the policy process and is technically very good. That's sort of more or less the sort of, I guess, approach for point of entry for impact. And so I wondered if anyone else could comment on this. I think it was Evelyn that noted a similar sort of concern is how does this relate then in the policy processes with policymakers? And I want to ask, could speak to that, because that's something that I've really struggled with.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that sort of that insight from perspective of international policy and the challenges that are associated with developing or rather using methods in that space. I'm just thinking in that broader scheme of things, and I'm seeing a comment here from Joanes, and he says that the conversation is actually bringing in different perspectives, different disciplines. Joanes, would you say that space of bringing in different perspectives and different disciplines, we already in some sense contributing to how we value diversity of methods?
Yes, Joel, I think I'll reinforce that. The various contextual experiences from the different examples, I think already indicates that there is really a potential really to find a solution in diversity. So I just wanted to reinforce that point. Thanks, Joel.
All right, thanks, Joanes. I think there's quite some methods that have also been shared as part of the Mentimeter, methods like, art-based and creative methods, such as theater of the oppressed. I'm not sure who pointed that out, but I think that's a very interesting way of looking at inclusion in methods, theater of the oppressed, or using aspects like photo voice. And it will be very interesting for someone who's done that, theater of the press or photo voice, who could give some kind of example on how that turned out and whether the results were could be also as broad, as opened up as possible. We have other methods like using workshops. We have methods here including, of course, we've talked about participatory reflection and action research, inclusive participatory methods, narratives. Yeah, that's something that has also come up. And I'm wondering about, I don't know who would put this, but if you are the one who contributed to the idea of theater of the oppressed, I'm very interested, I think, in listening to how that worked out. Yeah. Chrissy, was that your contribution, or? Maybe I should rephrase. Has anyone used photo voice or theater of the oppressed? And TS also raises a very interesting question here about how to actually apply some of these methods in the current pandemic times. Has anyone been able to use any of these methods in the last, say, year or so in some way?
So I have one example. I mean, I have used photo voice quite a lot in the past in different projects. I find it works particularly well if you're working with young people. And the premise of photo voice is that you give essentially cameras to people, or nowadays people have phones, of course, and they record a particular process, or I've used it quite a lot in evaluations. So they document their experience of change through a particular project. I've used it with a climate change project in Nicaragua, for example. And then using their photos, they storyboard. So they, if you like, create a narrative. And then usually there's some form of sort of showing that publicly or indeed virtually nowadays. And it's a very powerful method for bringing out what stories do, right? So it links to the point about the narrative methods that's been mentioned, storytelling as a way to understand experience and deep kind of embodied experience. So yeah, I think they're really interesting methods. In terms of the question on how to do this in the pandemic, I think after a year, many in the community of participatory methodologists, some I think are extremely enthusiastic about how much can be done virtually. I'm someone I've tried a lot of things, and I think some things do work and some things certainly don't work. So I think there's no doubt that there is limitations to what we can do at a distance. But at the same time, just recently I ran a process which was using narratives, life stories, and doing an analysis, a participatory analysis of those with some of the storytellers using online tools like Miro or Mural. So there are some ways, but of course we know that that's only for those who have the capacity to engage online with the technology. So.
Thanks, Marina. I think there has been, of course, trials to have things like work cafes online and stuff like that, and having some of these workshops to just collect insights and all that. But still, for many people, I would imagine that using most of the participatory approaches, especially that involves the local community and looking at sort of bottom up building up of arguments is still challenge. But maybe I'll bring in Chrissy one more time to tell us about the example she's just shared on the chat about, having to tell poster stories, if I could call it that. Poster stories, having had photos and then narrating those stories and eventually having some kind of a poster story. How did that work out in the long run?
Yes, so that was with the rural community, and it was right in the beginning of the process. So I visited them a number of times over a period of about a year. And early on in the process, I wanted to just learn from them who they are and what their lives are like. And so they were divided into groups, small groups of about 4 or 5 people, and each one had a device, and they went out and took photographs of the community. And I told them that I would be using those photographs for them to tell me about their community. So I went back and had them printed so that there's a paper copy of the photographs. And with my next visit, they used those photographs that they had taken and made a poster using the photographs, but telling a story. It's a while ago, but the one group, for example, just showed the process of when somebody dies in the community. So they had a widow, a photo of a widow who had recently lost her husband, and explained why she was wearing the clothes she was wearing, what the traditions were in that community, and then also how other community members would come and assist her with resources, and all kinds of things like that. And because I'm a veterinarian, so my agenda was about actually not so much only animal health, but one health, human and animal health. This may seem irrelevant, but I needed to hear that and to experience the world from their perspective, and that really helped a lot. So I think it's a very useful way of getting to know people, and in that trust building exercise, and also it makes you listen. I think that the average researcher, the average academic, is not necessarily a good listener by nature, and I think that is a skill we really have to practice. So that was my experience with that. I was just busy writing a chat in the chat box about the question earlier, or the point raised by the colleague in Cape Town about engaging on policy issues. And that is actually my current challenge as well, because the people I want to engage with now are fellow professionals that have to basically make policy and implement policy in their countries. So it's an international group of people, local African countries. And my idea is to use a participatory engagement with these professionals, so it's not grassroots level people, in order to find out what is really happening in their countries with regards to the policies, guidelines that we are supposed to be implementing. And I want to try and see whether these policies that have been set out for them, it's an international guideline that they are supposed to be following, but I'm not sure how realistic it is. It feels very colonial, you know, these guidelines that were set by an organization based in Europe. So I'm going to try and use a kind of participatory reflection and action approach, even with them, to see whether there really is a place for those guidelines in Africa, or whether we need a more Afrocentric approach to the whole topic and perhaps create something new. So I'm looking beyond just the policy and that needs to be implemented. I'm trying to look at whether the policy is even appropriate for what it is meant to be doing, if that makes any sense. And that's when I spoke about the community of practice, and that's when I lost connectivity. So please don't repeat anything that's been said already. Forgive me for that.
Thanks so much, Kisi. Just before there's a question here from Asnath, and she asks whether your method was owned by the community, or this was your idea, and whether it was embraced by the community that you are working with.
No, it certainly when I started out, everything was my idea. And I recognize that the ideal is that one goes in completely open-minded. I think that for that particular setting, it worked in the end, because the more we went along with the process, the more the participants took control and had agency and made their own decisions. But with a photo voice, that was definitely my idea. And luckily, they were very keen on doing it. They enjoyed doing it, and they enjoyed telling the story. But it could as well not have worked because it was just my idea.
All right, great. I would probably pose this question to Marina on differentiating storytelling and photo voice, and whether in some sense these kind of methods could be considered sort of decolonized approaches, or rather contribute towards decolonizing research in your experience in using them. Are they methods that effectively could open up and broaden out how we do research?
Sure, thanks, Joel. Quizzy, is it, just shared a great example of what essentially is the kind of the basis of photo voice, and so it includes very much the visual. The photo is part of the method. It includes a storytelling element too, or a storyboarding element within it. But storytelling is, there are many different narrative methods or story-based methods, life story, life histories, etc. There are many ways in which people use stories as part of a methodology. I use a life story approach, which is then collecting life stories from particularly, this is with more marginalized populations, and then you can use them in a causal analysis to understand the system dynamics that might keep them in a particular situation. That's one approach. But storytelling is also there's quite a lot of interesting story-based approaches within the climate change sphere right now. In fact, Karen O'Brien, I forget, Entangled Futures, is it? I forget. I'll put it in the chat in a minute. But they did a really brilliant project, which was based on narratives around climate change. And yeah, just I guess to say that story in terms of whether they're decolonized or whether they're not. I think the whole question about decolonizing a methodology isn't only about who brings it in, right, or where it comes from. That's part of it for sure. But I think it's what it enables you to critique in terms of power through the method. So also, I've had one experience in the Solomon Islands. So Pacific Islanders tend to use story and song, and I think this is true in other communities, where in fact using traditional song and stories within songs was part of a methodology. This was in looking at small scale fisheries and conservation of fisheries. So that's an example of, we might call it a narrative method, but it's based, similar to what Adriana was sharing before, it's based on a local way of sharing information, way of keeping information, or making sense, if you like, of a complex problem. I hope that answers the question, Joel.
Thanks, Marina. I think it illuminates the whole question and the differences that we can have between storytelling and photo voice. I wanted to ask Mary Maina Felix if there's a question of how is this, while we have these methods, or rather we have some ideas on applicability of these methods in the global south, how does it integrate with collaborative ideas at the global level? Felix, do you want to just
yes,
voice that out?
Yeah, I think mine is quite a general question, because it's from where I sit, and probably just because of lack of knowledge on this subject, which I'm gaining very much thanks to your webinars. So I see a lot of impressive methods of diversity of methods that is in use, and I hear a lot of case studies, but the question and what I'm curious about is in terms of collaboration, and especially because that's what I'm busy with right now. How the global south is really becoming a major player in research. So how are these methods sustained? Is it are the frameworks lost on us as a global south, or is there anybody who has had real good experience that they have redefined the way a project or a research was running just because they changed the methodologies they were using based on the community or based on the on the area that they are working on? So it was it's a question of who has done it, or if not, are we thinking of ways of ensuring that this remains the case? And definitely, because we know that decolonizing the whole field of knowledge starts with the global south having their voice being heard on the research table at the moment any project is going on. But yeah, so that's probably is more of a question than giving any feedback or any answer to the comments. So yeah, I'm curious just to know if
Thanks, Mary. I think it's a principle of that kind of question is why we are asking this broader question about decolonizing methods. And of course, the question is always for whom are we doing this, and how does that affect the landscape in which we do our research? So I don't know if anyone is ready for a response on that. I wanted to bring in Joanes. If it would be possible that we look at it from a partnership perspective. And I think if we reflect on the STEPS Centre and how it has been able to have this sort of decentralized centers of sustainability, including one of which is part of this conversation, the Africa Sustainability Hub, and the other hubs within the STEPS Centre sort of global consortium, we realize that it gives an opportunity at different areas for researchers to be able to participate in these discussions. So whereas we are thinking about decolonizing methodologies, we of course have to think about how that broadly reflects in the different partnerships we are engaged in. I think in a simpler way, I would perhaps suggest that as we keep talking about decolonizing methodologies, we keep having that reflection. In our previous conversation, one of the things that was very resourceful was that as researchers need to first reflect on ourselves and how we carry out research, and whether the people who we work with sort of as people who are researched, we give them an opportunity to actually express themselves. And this is a question about broadening out, being able to include as much our input into different contexts that we are looking into. I don't know if anyone has a response to, co-response to the question that was raised by Mary about how are we using the sort of methods developed, or rather case examples from the South, when we collaborate with other researchers globally.
Yes, I would like to comment a little bit on that. My experience, it's not so good, I will say. I have some experience that were not very productive, I will expect it, but others a little bit more. I have been working within a big project with different universities in Bolivia and different universities from Belgium. And then at the beginning, they said that they wanted to approach, to embrace the transdisciplinary approach and bringing together. This is a kind of program, the Belgium program, that they want to build capacities in the South And in the call that they offered to these universities in the South, they said they would like to have different universities together to learn from each other. So the principle is very good, but the problem is when the leader of the project has something different in mind. And this was one of my experience in Bolivia, that they were really he was really keen to help Bolivian people, but from a very colonized perspective that he didn't realize that he has. So I have been working with the people, and I noticed that they say, yes, we want to work with them, but they are doing other things that we don't want to do it. And I saw how the people were very stressed. They got the project, they were very stressed. Some of the researchers were even crying during my interviews because they felt a lot of pressure that they want to run the project. They don't want to lose the money because it was a lot of money, but it was a really top-down approach. And this is something that that it is very difficult to deal with it. As some of the professors, they were not really aware of the imposing methodologies and ways of thinking, and it is quite common. Even that if they were saying that they wanted to, and they were trying to push to have a participatory approaches, they were not really listening to the other. And this is what bring me to stepping back from this project and said, I really don't have any possibility to work there within these power relations. And it took me to the other project that I'm working now. But there are other experience with project in Cuba also, that the relation is a little bit more horizontal. But there the problem is that the limitations that the policy and the government put under the table, it is very difficult to deal with all the different pressures that the professors they have to deal. Yeah, they don't have really complete freedom to do, and they have to follow many different procedures, administrative procedures that are in a way breaking the collaboration process, because there are a lot of expectations from the North, and the North, they don't realize all the pressures and the difficulties that the people from the South in different conditions like Cuba and Bolivia, they're going on. So for me, it is a question of really the difficulties of realizing and putting out of our privilege that we have. Yeah, and now we are starting an evaluation of this kind of projects with another colleagues, where we will try to see what is needed really, because we are really interested to understand what is really needed to bring this collaboration and more equal, more justice, and more more collaboration in a partnership. But it is, I will say that this is a question that still need to be answered. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adriana. I think the question about power relations when it comes to projects and decision making and space for people to be able to express the different ideas is actually a real challenge, even as we think about decolonizing methods and how we do research. Kisi also has an example. I wanted to give an opportunity to also just quickly also share with us an example and experience when it comes to this space to actually explore or rather develop global South related methods, whether in the decoloniality is space.
Yes, so I'm involved in animal welfare, which is looking after the health and welfare of animals, and there are certain international guidelines that member countries are expected to follow. So, South Africa was identified as having certain deficits in this area, and we were teamed up with an organization in Italy to for them to do training for us, which was a great opportunity and much appreciated and was very valuable. But in the beginning, it was very clear that the people that were training us had their own idea of what they needed to teach us. They did not ask first, what do you already know? What are the issues that need to be addressed? It was a dumping of information on us, of information produced in the North. And I think in a way we kind of modeled the more participatory approach with them, and that sort of softened up the whole thing a little bit more, and they became more receptive. But even recently in another collaboration with colleagues also from Europe, they are similar to what Adriana explained. It was also Belgian university and another one in Italy, and universities in South Africa, a number of universities where there's this knowledge transfer process meant to take place. And just in the topics that they, so the ideas that we are training the smaller universities in conjunction with the European universities. And just the topics that they recommend are completely not relevant to our situation here. And again, for me, it wasn't a matter of tell us what you think you need. It was a matter of this is what we have, and we're really good at this, and this is what we can offer. And again, just having asking the right questions and having a decent conversation around it did make it better, because there's no use to be becoming defensive and saying you guys don't know what's going on here and you are just continuing the whole colonization process. That they don't think like that. But like I said, just modeling a different approach already helps a little bit in addressing that divide, because I think we always feel a bit yeah, we feel oppressed by having this parachute research being dropped onto us, and without good homework being done by collaborators, and without collaborators spending enough time to understand in my case, the issues in Africa and Southern Africa specifically. Yes, so that's just some of my experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chrissy. Thank you, everybody, for really being part of this discussion. I think it's only for time that we have to sort of wind down, but I really appreciate the dedication for staying all through as we discuss this whole concept around valuing diversity and how that diversity can actually be an opportunity as part of decolonizing methods. This whole conversation still goes on. We have already had some discussions. We have the other next discussion will be in June, and this discussion will be sort of building onto some of the concluding remarks that we've already had when it comes to philosophical underpinnings of methods. And here we are talking about whether the different ontologies or the different ways we practice can actually be resourceful Just to document so that we have sort of a basis for us to continue having this conversation, we also have a book project. We have already put out call for book chapters. And this would basically be something that we are building towards in case studies, just what we've spoken about, some theoretical practices, some kind of methods that have already been used in different contexts, and the implications of those kind of methods. We also do have summer school this year in August as part still of these conversations, and we'll be looking at building capabilities that can be able to challenge the dominant ideas. In this case, we are talking about people have not been able to articulate, for example, how we can broach these subjects when we're talking about collaborations. So how do we build capacity in that space to be able to actually actively continue pursuing this agenda of decolonizing methodologies and decolonizing research that can contribute to transformation to sustainability. I'd like to invite Joanes Atela, who is also the main convener of the Africa Research and Impact Network, to just give us some closing remarks as we go towards finishing this session today. Joanes, if you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Joel, and thank you, everybody. I think mine would be just to say thank you for the time and for the timely and really very exciting discussions. I think this is where we need to be, and this is the kind of debate that basically we need to have in the global South. When I listen to some of the discussions and conversations around methodological domination, especially from the North, which is something we've been trying to struggle with for quite some time. And of course, there has been a lot of concerns that there is no space for the South to inform the agenda, and as most of you have made it clear that the South needs to be on the table of the research. But the question is, how are we going to do that, which I think is still a critical one. And we did ask this question when we started the decoloniality seminar series, that really are our systems, for instance, if you take Africa, are we in a position or are we ready to be able to receive decoloniality? If we say then, okay, we have a space to engage, or we have a platform to engage, because in a democratic society, everyone, and as Marina mentioned, said it rightly, that really the decoloniality is not about removing or sort of excluding certain methodologies, even if they're from certain quarters, but it's a question of really appreciating that there is this diversity of methodologies that come into play, and how best can we then engage with them? How can we criticize them? How can we broaden them out in a way that really respond to the multiple challenges that we have as Africa? And I think this kind of discussion is what we need to have to answer that particular question. Because there's a lot of good things going on, for instance, in Africa, and of course in other parts of the global South, a lot of interesting experiences, a lot of great methodological experiences and sort of learnings. But certainly in terms of leadership, to be able to profile all this to a way that, from the global South, we can be organized to be able to engage the dialogue space in a more strategic way. I think that is what we've been lacking. And this has also been exacerbated by the fact that the African research space has been preoccupied by a lot of systemic things, a lot of systemic challenges, a lot of bureaucratic and traditional ways of thinking. And for a long time, I mean, in the era of the people like Alicia's Juma, where this space was being opened up, and then in between, we lost it somewhere. So we went back into fighting for budgets, fighting to look for money, fighting to be able to align ourselves, with the different opportunities, which is all fine because, that's important. But I think we lost the leadership and the organizational space as the Global South to be able to engage in dialogue when it comes to research and scientific trajectories that really tackle the global challenges. So that particular leadership is what I think, if you talk about partnership, we are trying to bring back through this partnership with the STEPS Centre. And it is a journey which has come from far, because the STEPS Centre, I personally, for instance, I was, my first eye-opener to the world of research and viewing things in different ways, actually opening up my mind to be able to see this trajectory, was actually inspired by the STEPS summer school and the STEPS engagement through a number of collaborative initiatives. So that is a model that is possible, that we are here, 10 years later, we are now trying to really allow and use some of those skills that have been developed from the North to be able to resuscitate the Global South in a way that we are really pursuing a platform for voices, a platform for solutions, a platform for really intellectual leadership and intellectual debate. And this is what, again, has been lacking in the continent. So I want just to say, this is very timely from where I sit, or where most of us young scholars sit, very useful, very strategic. And I would like just to urge us that we are going to continue profiling these particular platforms. It's starting with the decoloniality in terms of the STEPS methods here. And I think it's just, the beginning of most of the conversations. We would like to be able to clearly articulate our position as Africa, as the Global South. We would like to clearly, using evidence, some of these contextual best practices, how can we profile them better in this particular context? And if that can be part of this decoloniality debate, then I think that would be very strategic. So allow me to say thank you, because time has gone. And thanks to everybody. Thanks to Joel for leading this process. Thanks to the STEPS Centre for always partnering with us and supporting us to be able to profile African voices. Thanks to the ARIN fellows who I've seen here engaging very actively in the process. And I do promise you that this is actually the start of a vision that all of us together and collectively, we are going to take forward. So thanks to everybody, and may God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joanes, for those remarks. Just to reinforce that as part of the work we do and as part of trying to build this capacity enough to be able to challenge the dominant, please feel free to engage within the ARIN fellowship, and you can write to us for that. Also, when we are continuing the seminars, please participate, and of course the book project that I've shared the link in the chat box. Important also for those people who have very good cases that they'd like us to also share within the summer school. You're also invited to be a facilitator, or if you want to participate in the summer school, of course, you're welcome to submit your application through the application portal. Otherwise, I say thank you so much, and we look forward to the next discussion in June. Thank you all, and have a great day. Afternoon and evening. Goodbye.